Robert and I never wrote this book to be like a self-help book, and here are the answers, right? My answer to your question is a little higher than that, which is to prompt the reader to think intentionally about their legacy. I can't tell you the number of times Robert and I sit down with people who've built really successful businesses. We say, please follow my advice, enjoy the journey along the way. I wish I'd spent more time with my children, with my spouse, with my friends, because all of a sudden they arrive in the end zone and wealth is not an issue anymore, but their families are broken, they don't have friends, they are lonely, and they think to themselves, what in the world have I done this all for? I hope it prompts people to think about where the puck is going to be rather than chasing the puck around them.
Not everybody has, no family is 100% functional, but they have a spirit of love and generosity, and they talk about their problems. They don't run away from them.
Courageous communication. Read the Balentine paradox that I talked about. And this is a three-generation family. This is in their third generation, trying to identify the next CEO of the business. And so by shirking the courageous conversations about who has skills and who has not, they set up this really formal process, hiring an outside consultant, vetting the culture, like my friend, applying the Vistage playbook to a family, right? Unintentionally putting two cousins against each other, neither of whom actually wanted the job. It wasn't until I said, guys, why don't you sit down and talk to each other about this? Because one was a really good salesperson and one was really good at operations, but neither of them wanted to be the CEO. And so I wish I had an easier answer, but it's courageous communication from my seat.
And that's also the hardest thing, particularly when there's not alignment between mom and dad.
Yep.
Because if mom and dad are not aligned, then the children are going to play one off the other. There's going to be discord. It's so important. My dad used to say to me, never underestimate the power of pillow talk. And when you have parents who are not on the same page, the trickle-down effect can be really devastating. It's so important to listen through the eyes of the next generation. I mean, that's our third principle, seeing the world through the next generation's eyes. Because all of us have expectations of what our children are going to do and how they're going to turn out. But they are their own person. You really learn a lot putting yourself in the other person's shoes and listening, not just communicating clearly, but listening to how they're reacting and giving them the opportunity to have a voice and not feel threatened.
One important lesson that I would impart that I have learned, the power of communication in the family setting and also the business setting is so important. As I tell my colleagues at Balentine, as we continue to grow, we're not going to face fewer problems, we're going to face more. It's our ability to solve them more quickly, just like in a family, to solve conflict more quickly.
You really can't change the culture unless you're the leader. And most of us as parents are leaders of our family. And trying to create that culture where you talk about things. Many of us grew up where problems were just kind of shunted aside. It's not nice to talk about these things. But every family has dysfunction. They either talk about it or they don't. But the healthiest and most successful families embrace it and they give everybody a voice. Because where it doesn't work is where you try to run your family like you run your company.
Right.
Autocratic, not giving people a voice, talking down to them. And we talk about this in the book in our second principle, which is distinguishing between the family business and the business of the family.
Courageous conversations are hard. And I have two additional points to make about effective communication. The first, in my experience, is meeting people when they're ready to communicate. So there's a tendency in our profession, David, to say, you need to learn this and you need to do that. And often children aren't ready for that conversation. The other aspect is modeling generosity. Modeling generosity is so important. So we have a client who's become a good friend of Robert and mine, and she's the daughter of the family that started one of the most powerful brands in North Carolina. So she's been around wealth all her life. But she's been particularly effective at meeting her children when they are ready to have the conversation. So we write in the book about every Sunday night, her ritual is to have a family party. It might be a hat party. It might be a board game where they can talk about the legacy of their family and what it means to be grateful for the wealth that they have inherited. And I think that's a point that Dr. Jim Grubman has made. I think many of you might have been at our event with Dr. Jim Grubman 2 years ago, but the importance of modeling generosity is so, so important in setting up families for, resilient transfer of generational wealth.
I think that's the number one thing you can do to avoid raising spoiled children. Because all of us have this parental instinct to want to make it better for our children. Granddaddy walked 5 miles through the snow to school, and, Dad rode the bus, and now you're in a carpool. And it's really, really hard to teach your children that not everybody lives this way, and the importance of delayed gratification.
Yeah.
And struggling is a really good thing. When your daughter turns 16, you don't want to take her out on I-285 and teach her how to drive. You typically go to a mall or a church parking lot or somewhere on a Sunday, and you drive around, and then when she's ready, you take her on a residential street, and then maybe you go down Peachtree, and then ultimately you may take her out on 285. And I think about teaching children about money kind of the same way. And I'm a big believer in kind of teaching through dribs and drabs. I'm looking at my daughter on the front row. When she was in 7th grade, she came home from school one day and said, "Dad, our class is going to take a trip to Australia. Can I go?" And I said, "That sounds great. How much does it cost?" And she told me how much it cost, and I said, "How are you going to pay for it?" And she looked at me like, well, I kind of thought you and Mom were going to pay for it. And I said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. For every dollar that you earn on your own, Mom and I will match you $1 to go on this trip." So she started a summer camp called Camp Boomerang, the camp that makes you want to come back, in order to make money for her trip to Australia. And she wrote her brother's 1st grade class parents. And in a 2-week period, she and her sister had paid all the expenses for this little summer camp that she hosted at our house and raised more than enough money to be able to go on the trip. And I think about, you're not doing your daughter any favors giving her a brand new car when she's 16. You have got to teach people, no matter how much money you have, the importance of the joy that comes from earning a living. Otherwise, they're going to not have any context, because I've worked with families the last 40 years, and I've seen really good practices and I've seen really bad practices. And part of the pain of inherited wealth is that people don't feel worthy. That the reason they're wealthy is because of some dead ancestor or somebody that they really didn't know. And we talk in our 3rd principle about seeing the world through the next generation's eyes. There are a lot of instances where children feel guilty, or they don't have a lot of self-esteem because they didn't make it, or they don't feel they can possibly live up to their dad who started this successful company.
I think the importance of working a summer job. I ran a paper route. I've seen it in my own family. 3 years ago, I made the mistake of, let's convene a family meeting and talk about the stock market, and they were not ready. It was only when Philip started a pressure washing business last year out of the blue, where he started to confront some of the challenges we all face in building a business, like how do you market, how do you get the rich neighbor to actually pay the bill that they said, how is he going to pay back dad for contributing capital into the business, that I saw the confidence in him, the joy of having money for him to choose to spend it as he wishes, as opposed to me trying to teach it.
So the question is, should you disclose to your children the net worth of your family? I had a client years ago who was talking to his children, and his daughter said, "You and Mom are really rich, or our family's really rich, aren't they?" And he said, "Well, your mother and I are." So, again, I believe in making it age appropriate.
Totally.
I don't think that any child needs to know the net worth of mom and dad unless they're well into adulthood and there's a family business or there's some estate planning going on. But let's be realistic. You can look up the price of your house on Zillow. You can read in the newspaper just about everything you can about, what dad sold the company for. You know how you vacation. You know whether you fly private or whether you're sitting in the back of the commercial plane. Children are not naive. And so having conversations but giving them information on an age-appropriate basis, I think is important. One of the things that I did when my children went off to college is Betty and I would put a certain amount of money in their bank account at the beginning of the year, out of which they had to write the check for the tuition and the fraternity or sorority dues and the money to get home for Thanksgiving and Christmas. And we penciled it out so that maybe there was $300 a month or $400 a month or something left over. But teaching that early on is so important because you don't want to be in a conversation with you're in your 50s or 60s and all of a sudden you realize mom and dad have got some huge estate tax problem or they both drop dead and you inherit a bunch of money and you don't have a clue how to take care of it.
What is the appropriate age to begin seriously discussing the family's wealth with the children if they are not involved in the family business?
As soon as they're ready to do so. And I think there are some basic financial techniques that can be taught early on that helps with financial literacy way beyond the conversation around the family business. I mentioned the example of our friend in North Carolina, who I think has already done a tremendous job of starting to prepare her children for the unfolding wealth that is slowly being revealed. And she's been super intentional about getting them involved around philanthropy, as we discussed earlier, and modeling generosity so that when the time comes, they are ready to have a very serious conversation about what the family business net wealth was that's been created for them. So as soon as children are ready to do so. And I have seen in families that sometimes the youngest child is more ready than the oldest child. People confuse age and experience with readiness. It's not always the case.
We use a term in the book called weaponizing money.
Yep.
I have seen that time and time again where parents will attempt to evoke behavior by either giving or withholding money, and I think that is toxic. I think when money is given to children, it should be freely given. That doesn't mean that if you're making distributions out of a trust to your child and all of a sudden they've got an addiction issue or a gambling problem or something that you continue to enable that. But I think it is a very dangerous road to attempt to withhold money or use money.
And weaponizing your wealth often comes along with the other trap, which is the cloning trap, which I talk a lot about, which is, what do you mean our children are making different choices than we would? Are you kidding me? I mean, it frustrates me when I watch my son make some choices. But in the context of wealth, weaponizing your wealth and the cloning trap, I have seen lead to more breakups than almost anything else.
There's a saying that you want to give your children enough money that they can do anything, but not so much that they can do nothing.
Yeah.